You're listening to Campus Killings, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
and Citizen Detective. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hi, Megan, and hello, listeners. Today's case is local to us in New Jersey, and I'm pretty sure you've heard of it, the Seton Hall University dormitory fire of 2000. Now, this was very highly publicized, and it became a bit of a headliner for policy changes at New Jersey institutions, which we'll definitely talk about a bit later. Do you know this case?
No, it's crazy. I don't know this case. I know you do, and I know I should, but for some reason, we'll see. It might be one of those where you're telling the story, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, but it does not sound familiar at all to me.
Interesting. I think that's strange, but you were not living in New Jersey at this time.
No. I was in New York then.
See, I'm a New Jersey native. You're not. So
yeah, no.
It makes more sense.
I lived in Long Island, then New York. I mean, I did live in Jersey at some point and work in Jersey, but no, this was not way before my time.
Yes. Okay. Today's case was inspired by a photojournalism series, a book, and a documentary. The Pulitzer Prize-winning photography by Matt Rainey and the journalism by Robin G. Fisher became a book titled After the Fire, and it was written by Fisher in 2008. It went on to become a national bestseller in 2010, and a few years later, there was a documentary made by the same name. So this is where most of the information from today's case is from, and we will have a link to both the book and the documentary in our show notes for any of our listeners who would like to check them out. And this episode will be a little bit different than normal. We tend to focus on deceased victims in most of our episodes, but today I wanted to change it up a little bit for a more hopeful note and tell the story of two students who survived and have made it their life's mission to keep such a tragedy from happening again.
This is a nice change of pace for us. Thank you.
Yes. But before we meet them, as usual, let's take a look at the university. Seton Hall University. Starting as Seton Hall College, it was founded in 1856 as a Catholic institution of higher education in South Orange, New Jersey. And though its tenets are based in the Catholic faith, even from the very beginning, the college was open to male students of all faiths and nationalities. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, the college expanded to university status and opened to female students in 1937. In 1951, Seton Hall created their now well-known School of Law, run by the first female dean in the United States.
Ooh.
Isn't that a fun fact?
Yeah, that was a fun fact. Thank you for that tidbit.
The campus continued to expand exponentially through the 20th century, and in 1990, it went from being a mostly commuter school to a predominantly residential campus with enough dormitories to house over 2,000 students. The largest and most prominent of these buildings was Boland Hall, the freshman dormitory. With 6 floors and a 700-student occupancy, it held a large recreation room in the basement for freshmen to hang out, make friends, and build community in their first year. And as we know from our own work, building friendships in that first year of college has a huge outcome on student retention. And this is where 2 young men would find themselves as roommates. Alvaro Llanos and Shawn both had the same goals when they moved into Boland Hall in the fall of 1999. Get a college degree to escape the inner cities that they had grown up in and to make a difference in the world. Alvaro was from Paterson, New Jersey, in an area where gangs were rampant, and he was surrounded by crime and drug traffickers. In later interviews, he explained that it was so easy for kids from his area to be tempted down the wrong path, as becoming a drug dealer was much more financially lucrative than the minimum wage jobs available to most people.
Sorry, what area did you say that was, Amy? He was from?
Patterson, New Jersey.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you know that? You know
yeah,
Patterson,
sure.
right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Shawn had also come from a tougher area. He had grown up in Newark, where he was raised by his mom and his sister, and his environment was exactly like Alvaro's.
Yeah, Newark was pretty tough. Patterson and Newark both pretty tough.
Yep. Shawn spent much of his childhood passing Seton Hall University on the train and decided from a young age that he wanted to go there. He strove to get excellent grades in high school, and he joined the Boys and Girls Club Foundation that assisted him with tutoring, and they also ended up giving him a scholarship for college. When the two boys met on move-in day, they instantly realized that they had so much in common, and it was a good thing that they bonded so early, as they both experienced a serious culture shock in their first semester. They also both struggled a bit to keep up with their classes. However, they prevailed by December of 1999, earning good grades, and they went home to enjoy winter break with their families. Both boys were the first in their families to go to college, and their parents were exceedingly proud of their sons for doing so well in their first semester. So they were both looking forward to their second semester as they returned to campus in January. Little did they know that their lives would take a turn for the worst only days later. Alvaro and Shawn described the night of January 18th, 2000 as just a regular night on the college campus. Seton Hall's men's basketball team won an away game against their big rivals, St. John's. And Shawn remembers that the campus was extra alive that night. Everyone was celebrating the school's huge win. He recalls that students were playing music all night in the dorms and running up and down the halls. But while other students partied, Shawn and Alvaro were studying.
So responsible.
Yes. As it got later in the night, Shawn went to bed and Alvaro ended up falling asleep at his desk. Around 4:30 in the morning, they were awoken by the sound of the fire alarm blaring in the hall. But the boys didn't hustle to get out of the building. Bolin Hall had a history of false fire alarms, and most of the students, including Alvaro and Shawn, just assumed that this was another person who had maybe burned their ramen in the microwave or somebody who's messing around and pulled the fire alarm.
I get it. I remember all those false fire alarms as well.
But when Shawn opened the door, he was hit in the face by a wall of thick, black smoke and unbearable heat. He recalled telling Alvaro this is the real deal and that they had to get out fast. The boys began to crawl along the now molten hot floor tiles searching for the stairwell. Shawn thought Alvaro was right behind him, but the smoke was so black and thick that the two got separated, and Alvaro ended up heading right into the heart of the fire. The heat was so intense that he recalls feeling his hair burning off, but he managed to get to a fire door. As he pushed it open, a fireball erupted from the burning ceiling above him, hitting him in the back and igniting his clothes. Luckily, 2 resident assistants happened to be in the stairwell helping other students get out. So as Alvaro fell into the stairwell, they rolled him on the floor to put him out and evacuated him from the building. This is my biggest fear.
Oh, really? Yeah. Now I understand that completely.
I mean, I have a lot, but
Yeah.
I think...
Oh, that's why when you said my biggest, I was like,
But being in a burning structure I couldn't imagine the fear and
terror.
Luckily, Shawn ended up crawling right past the heart of the fire in the 3rd floor's lounge, where he described the heat as excruciating. And though he made it out of the building, he collapsed from smoke inhalation and intense burns to his hands and his face.
Yeah.
As police and fire trucks responded to the scene, the captain of the South Orange Fire Department described seeing hundreds of students fleeing the area covered in soot as others jumped 40 feet from Bolin's Hall, 3rd story, while black smoke billowed out of the open windows. As he and his fellow firefighters entered the building, he remembered seeing a student run past him, and this student was so burnt that he couldn't tell if they were a male or a female.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, the heat was so intense it had liquefied the carpets and the floor tiles.
Right.
And later, investigators estimated that the fire must have been over 1,500 degrees in the hallway where Shawn and Alvaro crawled to the exit doors. When the building was evacuated and the fire finally put out, 3 students were dead, and 56 students, 2 firefighters, and 3 police officers suffered varying levels of burns and smoke inhalation. Shawn and Alvaro were amongst the most critically injured, and they, along with many others, were rushed to St. Barnabas Burn Unit in Livingston, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. Now, I know all about St. Barnabas Burn Unit in Livingston, New Jersey.
Oh, is this where Ethan went when
Yes.
he burned his leg with the hot tea?
Yes. Do you remember that? That was somewhat at the beginning of my time at FDU.
It was very much. Well, it was close to the beginning. Yeah, no, I remember that. That was awful.
Yeah, so my little baby got burnt by a cup of hot tea, so he spent 9 days in that burn unit, and they are absolutely incredible. That night, in particular, their ER was overrun with both the injured students and their families because many families didn't know which students had died or which one were in critical condition. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? Many of them were just searching the ER for their children, not knowing what was going on.
No, I have heard of scenarios like this. This is like, that reminds me of like when there's actually a school shooting. We've talked about this and you don't know. I just can't imagine, especially as having a child now. It's awful.
Journalist Robin Fisher recalled that it was the largest catastrophe the hospital had ever handled. As I mentioned, tragically, 3 students were officially pronounced as deceased. The victims were Aaron Carroll, a freshman majoring in criminal justice with the dream of becoming an FBI profiler, Frank Catabalota, a freshman majoring in biology who hoped to one day be a doctor, And both of these boys had died in the third-floor lounge while they were trying to get out of the building.
Okay.
Then lastly, there was John Quinta, who was a freshman majoring in elementary education, and he was found unconscious from smoke inhalation in his dorm room. Unfortunately, first responders were unable to revive him, and he had died at the scene.
Okay.
While Shawn and Alvaro were still alive after being brought to the burn unit, they were in extreme critical condition, and doctors weren't even sure if they would make it through the next 24 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Both were put in a medically induced coma as doctors and nurses went about the complicated process of assessing the full scope of their injuries. Shawn had extensive smoke inhalation damage to his lungs, as well as 16% of third-degree burns over his body, and these were mostly to his face and his hands. And then there was Alvaro, who had sustained third-degree burns from the top of his head all the way down his torso and his arms, resulting in burns on over 56% of his body. Now, his injuries were massive, and he required several intensive skin grafts during his recovery.
Sounds awful.
The families described the boys as looking like mummies, since they were wrapped in gauze from their heads to their waists for months. And the boys' recovery process was tenuous, and for several days, doctors could not promise their families that they would even make it. But after 14 days, Shawn woke up and his prognosis gradually improved. However, it would be 3 months before Alvaro woke up, and even after, his recovery took a very long time.
Yeah.
Likewise, even though Shawn was awake after only 2 weeks, he spent the next several months in occupational and physical therapy at the hospital. While recovering, Shawn visited Alvaro every day, talking to his friend even though he wasn't even sure if Alvaro could hear him.
Oh.
And even after Shawn was released from the hospital, he came back every day to sit with Alvaro after he completed his own physical therapy sessions.
That's so sweet.
Mm-hmm. I mean, these boys were already best friends, but I would imagine going through something so traumatic, how much closer it would bring you.
Right.
When Alvaro finally woke up, Shawn continued to visit him and encourage him through the difficult healing process. Alvaro would spend 9 months in the hospital, celebrating his 19th birthday in a wheelchair with his family and friends in the burn unit's waiting room. And even after he was released, I don't think you'll be surprised to know that he required several years of physical and occupational therapy. But while the boy's physical wounds were healing, the mental and emotional ones were still very raw.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
The burns that they had sustained completely changed their physical appearances, particularly in Alvaro's case, and they both found it difficult to be in public since people constantly stared at them. Likewise, they'd experienced a level of physical pain and recovery that nobody else in their age bracket really understood.
Right.
So it often felt very isolating, and they only really had each other and their families to lean on. And for Alvaro in particular, this was difficult because the girlfriend he had his first semester broke off their relationship while he was still in the hospital. And while he says he understood that it was a first relationship and would not last forever, it was still a blow to his psyche in light of his changed physical appearance.
I'll bet.
In spite of all they went through, both boys decided to return to campus for the fall of 2000. And though going back to a normal life was quite difficult, they were welcomed back with open arms and support from their fellow students.
So I'm dying to know, Amy, how this fire began. I'm sure there was an investigation.
Yeah, so the lingering question for both boys as they returned to the scene of their trauma was, how had this happened in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't the only ones thinking about that.
Of course.
While the boys were in recovery, Essex County detectives were working to answer that very question. But this was a difficult one to parse out because after the fire was put out, any surveillance footage or DNA evidence had been vaporized from the fire.
Yeah, but what year was this again? 2000?
99.
Oh, that's hard because that's before they developed serious arson investigations in terms of the scientific methods for testing fires.
Yeah, well, they ended up having the scene excavated by a team of specialists that required an archaeological approach.
Wow.
Yeah. So although technology wasn't where it is now, they still had ways to, figure out what was going on. And in the end, the experts had concluded that the fire started in the third floor lounge at 4:30 in the morning and that it had been deliberately set as the blaze was caused by an open flame set on a couch in the lounge.
Does that mean it was deliberately? I struggle with some of these because I don't know that means it was deliberate, but go on.
Okay. I think you're right. I think at this point, it would be hard to say that it was, deliberate, but I think it was clear that there was a point of origin. It wasn't electrical.
Yes.
So
yes.
It was clear that it was, but you're right. How do we know if it was deliberate or accidental?
Because I could see freshmen, especially like anyone who'd been intoxicated, leaving a candle. Like, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, luckily we will find out what ended up happening.
Oh, okay.
So the big question is, who did this, and was it a malicious act of arson? Because as we mentioned, there's a big difference between it being a malicious act of arson and it being accidental.
Right.
Police interviewed hundreds of students to try to work up a timeline of who was in the lounge around the time of the fire. And though it took over 18 months, they were finally given two names. Freshman Shawn Ryan and freshman Joseph Lepori. Now, Joseph had transferred to the University of Delaware immediately following the fire, while Shawn was still a student there.
Okay.
Now, both Shawn and Joseph were two freshmen that had lived in a quad on the third floor. This was around 50 feet from where the fire had started. And they, along with two of their friends, had gotten drunk and were hanging out in the lounge around 2 a.m. on the night of the fire.
Man.
At that time, Shawn Ryan ripped down half of a construction paper banner that had been tackled to a bulletin board, and he left it laying over the couch in the lounge. They left to continue partying in another friend's room. But around 4:30 a.m., Shawn and Joseph returned to the lounge and thought it would be a funny prank if they set the banner on fire. Now, they were thinking just enough to cause a little smoke, maybe so that the fire alarm would go off and the dorm would have to evacuate into the snow.
This is so awful. Okay.
Shawn lit a match, and he and Joseph handed it back and forth a few times before Shawn finally flicked it onto the banner. The paper smoldered and began to smoke, and the two left it and went back to their room.
I really understand that we're not, the brain is not formed at this age, but it really is hard for me to understand how they could have still thought that this would not have the consequences it did. It's hard.
Keep in mind, they were also intoxicated. I'm not justifying it, but just for us to understand, you said, the brain's not matured at this age. And then on top of that, intoxication.
I'm still struggling with it. But yeah, of course, I understand it.
So although their plan was to leave and go to their room, they barely made it over the threshold before the banner went up and caught the couch on fire.
Oh, yeah.
And within 5 minutes, the entire lounge was engulfed in flames, sending billowing black smoke down the hallway. According to later records, when Shawn and Joseph saw the smoke, they immediately knocked on several doors to wake up fellow students to urge them to leave the building. But they exited quickly and denied knowing anything about how the fire started when they were interviewed by police.
Right.
That's not surprising, but I can't imagine how they thought they were going to be getting away with this.
Right.
However, investigators corroborated several witness statements that placed the two of them at the scene. And Shawn Ryan admitted in a later interview that while he had torn the banner down, he wasn't the one who had tossed the match.
Okay.
This was the first piece of evidence for police that seriously pinpointed Shawn Ryan and his friend Joseph as the responsible parties.
Mm-hmm.
But as we know, arson is really hard to prove. And Shawn Ryan refused to speak to the police any further.
What about Joseph? Did he speak to the police, or did he also remain silent?
Well, he refused to speak to the police. And not only that, all of their friends and acquaintances refused to speak to the police.
Whoa.
So investigators, they did what they had to do. They served everyone in the Paris fraternity with grand jury subpoenas.
That's right. That's exactly
what I do. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know what I actually mean by that, this would essentially force the witnesses who were refusing to speak to police to have to appear before the Essex County grand jury for questioning about the case.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they could still plead the fifth at this time and not say anything, but detectives hoped that this would put enough pressure on the witnesses to tell the truth about what Ryan and Joseph were doing the night of the fire.
Also, they could plead the fifth, absolutely, but and then there's also the threat if they are pleading the fifth that later on they'll be prosecuted.
Well, all of the subpoenaed witnesses pled the fifth during the hearing.
What?
Yes, all of them.
Oh, wow.
So investigators were back at square one. But then they got an interesting call from the Essex County Homicide Unit. Their organized crime informant, Daniel Riccardi, who was involved with the Lucchese family, said that he had information on who had caused the Seton Hall fire.
Ooh.
So apparently Joseph's mother had contacted Riccardi asking for legal advice about what to do over her son's involvement with the fire.
Okay.
So this information gave police the green light for warrants to set up wiretaps in the Lepori residence in 2001. And while it's not clear what they heard, whatever they heard on the wiretaps was enough for investigators to take their case to a grand jury in 2003 and secure an indictment.
Okay.
After the grand jury approved the indictment, arrest warrants were signed for Joseph Lepori and Shawn Ryan, And this included charges for felony murder and reckless manslaughter. And this would mean a possible 30-year sentence for each of these boys.
Yes. We know that well in Jersey, felony murder, 30 years.
And while Shawn Ryan consented to being quietly led away in handcuffs in June of 2003, Joseph was looking to flee. Police who had been surveying him before his arrest witnessed him taking out large sums of money from several banks. Then when they tried to pull him over for a traffic stop, he tried to flee in his car but ended up crashing into another police car.
Oh my gosh.
So this isn't going to make things any easier for him.
No.
Once in custody, the pair were held on $2 million bail, and neither one of them would agree to a plea, and the next 3 years was filled with litigations before a trial date was finally reached.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
On November 15th of 2016, as the boys sat in the courtroom watching jury selection, they decided to change their minds. They pled guilty to third-degree arson, witness tampering, and Joseph also pled to a disorderly persons offense for fleeing his arrest.
Amy, this brings up also a good point. I just want to say a lot of people, or a lot of my students recently asked me, like, when is it, how long into a case can you plead guilty? Essentially, you can plead any time before the verdict is returned in most jurisdictions, even if the jury is deliberating.
Yeah, good point. As many are in high-profile cases, the plea was controversial because several of the deceased students' family members were not happy about it.
Right.
But Essex County prosecutors explained that arson is one of the hardest crimes to prove in court. And I didn't know this, but there's only a 2% success rate of conviction in arson cases.
Whoa.
So the prosecutor explained that a plea was a safer bet than sending the case to trial.
Well, let's hear what the plea is. I want to hear what the plea is before.
Yeah, but not only, the prosecutor is right. It is a safer bet, but they also didn't mention it saves them a lot of time and money as well. So there's other incentives of why they want to plead the case out.
It saves them time and money. It's considered a win when they check the box of convictions. So, yeah.
Okay, so you asked what the plea was.
Yes.
3 months later, on January 26, 2007, 7 years after the fatal fire, they were sentenced to 5 years with parole eligibility after 16 months.
No.
So that's less than a year and a half.
I'd be, if I were the families, I'd be pissed too.
So this becomes tricky because that is not enough time. 3 people died here.
Yep.
But if we look at was there the intent to harm, that's when these things get really tricky because we want justice for the victims, but we're talking about young kids who made a really stupid decision. And did they intend for this to take the lives of 3 fellow students? I would say probably not.
No, I still don't think the sentence is right. It doesn't reflect the severity of the crime.
I agree. And side note, Garden State Youth Correctional Facility, I taught there many years ago.
Oh.
That's the one in Bordentown. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So Alvaro and Shawn were in the gallery along with their families during this court proceeding.
Okay.
Along with the families of the 3 deceased students. And they all read victim impact statements to the defendants.
How did they feel about it? I mean...
Well, journalist Robin Fisher, who covered Shawn and Alvaro's recovery, was present at the sentencing and recalled that while Alvaro's wife was reading his victim impact statement, as standing was difficult for him, one of the defendants turned around to look at him and smirk. Other family members recalled that neither defendant showed any sign of remorse as the victim impact statements were read. And when given the opportunity to speak to the families, the defendants both responded with a simple "sorry for your loss" before sitting back down.
It's not a good look.
It's not. I think they definitely could have done more.
Okay.
But for however they carried themselves at the sentencing, both were granted parole for early release. Shawn Ryan was paroled in 2009 and Joseph was paroled in 2010. So I do want to point out that they both were denied their first parole in 2008.
But then how long did they actually serve? I can't do the math there. I should be able to.
So we're looking at around 2 years for Shawn and around 3 years for Joseph. Post-release, Joseph reportedly went on to get married, have a family, and work in the home improvement industry. Shawn also got married and started a family, and according to his lawyer, he currently works in New York City. While it's unclear how this all really affected the trajectory of the defendants' lives, Alvaro and Shawn are a different story. In 2010, they decided to turn their pain into purpose and began giving lectures at high schools and colleges throughout the U.S. to tell their story and provide information on fire safety and situational awareness. As of 2025, they're incredibly successful, traveling the country 8 months out of the year and giving around 200 to 225 presentations annually. In 2020, they were also part of the political push for a new law called the Campus Fire Safety Education Act, which uses federal grants to fund the fire safety programming on college campuses nationwide. While it was introduced by New Jersey senators in 2017, it stalled in Congress, and there was a new push in 2020 to get it approved. As of the recording of this podcast, it's unclear where the bill is in the system, but I couldn't find anything to say that it was passed into law yet. In addition to this political advocacy, Alvaro and Shawn are also liaisons to burn victims through the Burn Advocates Network. And every year on the anniversary of the Boland Hall fire, Alvaro and Shawn return to Seton Hall to attend the memorial ceremony for their 3 fellow students who died in the tragedy. When asked if they still harbor any anger towards Shawn and Joseph, the now 43-year-old men say no, not anymore. Forgiveness and acceptance was necessary for their recovery and their ability to move forward with their lives. And while their trajectories were forever changed by the fire, one of their main objectives is to make sure that their 3 fellow students are never forgotten. And in every presentation, they make sure that they say the names of Aaron, Frank, and John.
God, they sound like incredible human beings. I just got the chills from them,
Mm-hmm.
like before and after the fire, you know?
Mm-hmm. And Seton Hall also remembers their students. Following the fire, a memorial service was held for the 3 boys in the university chapel. A large memorial stone was also placed in front of Boland Hall, as well as a bell tower with 3 bells to represent Aaron, Frank, and John. Their names are inscribed on the bells, which toll every year on the anniversary of the fire. The 3 were also granted posthumous degrees at Seton Hall's 2003 graduation.
Oh, it's nice.
Annual memorials are held each year around the stone, followed by a mass for the 3 deceased students. And Seton Hall didn't stop at just memorials. There were huge policy changes that came out of this fire.
Yeah.
For one, the residence hall had never had a sprinkler system installed because it was one of the older dormitories on campus. And there were several other buildings missing sprinkler systems as well.
Oh, that could have been such a literally a lifesaver. Wow.
In the summer of 2000, only 5 months after the fire, sprinkler systems were installed in every building on Seton Hall's campus. And actually, this change did make a huge difference because in 2001, there was another fire in Boland Hall. This time, it was a trash can on the first floor. However, the sprinklers put the fire out before it even left the trash can, resulting in 0 injuries and a successful building evacuation. Also in 2000, New Jersey passed a state law requiring all college campuses to install sprinkler systems in their dormitories by 2004. To date, New Jersey still has stricter rules and regulations pertaining to dorm safety than any other state in the U.S., and this is directly due to the Seton Hall fire.
Okay, good.
However, even in 2025, many universities around the nation still have fairly lax dormitory laws surrounding sprinkler systems and other fire prevention. And much of this is due to disagreements between the state and the university about who's going to foot the costly bill to install fire prevention in old buildings. And these lax safety laws are one of the many reasons that Alvaro and Shawn feel called to present their stories to as many schools as possible as often as they do.
Right.
Their hope is that nobody else should ever have to endure what they have experienced. If our listeners would like more information on Alvaro and Shawn's presentations, or just want to know what schools they'll be visiting next, you can look them up at alanshawn.com or follow them on Instagram at Alvaro and Shawn. We'll also have a link to their website and Instagram in our show notes. We hope that our listeners enjoyed this slight change to our regular format. If you'd like us to cover more survivor stories, please send us your suggestions. We love researching your suggested cases. Before we go today, if you'd like to support Campus Killings, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts.
Your subscription will get you VIP access to all the shows on the network that not only includes hundreds of episodes of ad-free listening, but also bonus content and early access to episodes.
For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting this show in the process.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and search for either Campus Killings or AbJack, and you can start your subscription with a free trial.
Your support is greatly appreciated.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of Campus Killings.
Campus Killings is hosted by Dr. Megan Sachs and Dr. Amy Schlossberg, with research and writing by Abigail Belcastro. It's produced by Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to follow Campus Killings on social media. You can find Campus Killings on Twitter with the handle @CampusKillings or on Facebook at facebook.com/CampusKillings.
You can also visit the show's homepage at campuskillings.com. Be sure to tune in every other Saturday for new episodes of Campus Killings.